Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the LBJ Washington Center. I'm Tom O'Donnell. I'm the director of the LBJ Washington Center. This is our very first public event at the center, so we're pretty excited. We really are grateful to Human Rights First for choosing our space. A little bit about the LBJ Washington Center. There's the LBJ School of Public Affairs in Austin, Texas, which graduate degrees and PhDs in public policy. We are affiliated with the school. We are a new federal policy center and research center, but we also are part of what's called the DC Concentration Graduate School Program. And we have two of our LBJ DC fellows, first class, Joe Jenkins here, who helped put this on, and Kate Adams, who's with us. And so basically this concentration, they study 6 months in Austin, 2 semesters, and they come up to Washington. They study 6 months in DC. And while they're here in DC, they're working pretty much full-time jobs. So these two are here now, and they have class tonight at 6:30. And they work every Wednesday. So it's a pretty intensive program, but they get their degree on an accelerated basis. So I want to introduce Scott Cooper, who is the Director of National Security Outreach for Human Rights First. And obviously this is a World Refugees Day event, and I'm going to let him handle all the substance. So Scott Cooper.
Thanks, Tom. Well, good afternoon and welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here today. We have a strong connection to Texas. We had an event last week where Admiral Haynes gave a speech to commemorate World Refugee Day. And we partnered with Ryan Crocker, who's the dean at Texas A&M. And now we've got the University of Texas here, so strong connection.
Are they still in business, Texas A&M?
They are indeed. But we're enormously grateful to be able to partner with the LBJ School. I was here with Tom about 3 months ago, and there was no ceiling tiles, so you've done a remarkable job with these spaces, and we're just enthused about you guys coming to DC with this inaugural class. Joe has the unfortunate distinction of getting to work with me every day, and he deserves most of the credit for setting up this event. I will take just a few minutes to talk about how it is that we came to have this event on World Refugee Day and how we can and are trying to elevate the voices of veterans with respect to the topic of refugees. We started this Vets for American Ideals notion about a year ago as an idea of how could we get younger veterans engaged on kinds of issues. And when you think about those that wear the uniform, they generally are taught from the day that they enter into the service that you don't engage in the political arena. That's a tradition that George Marshall and George Washington continued throughout their time. I would submit though on this specific issue, this is quite personal for all of us, and that's why we're having these conversations today. We actually have 7 events around the country. There's 4 today. There was one this morning in New York City. There's one up in Boston tonight, and then another one in San Francisco later on this evening. That we're calling Conversations on Freedom. Vets and refugees discuss what America means to them. The reason I say it's personal, and I'm very disappointed, Ajmal Falkari was also supposed to join us on the panel, and he had something come up about an hour ago, and sent his regrets that he can't be here with us today, but his story is a perfect example of why this is personal to us. Ajmal grew up near Kabul in Afghanistan. He spent 9 years serving as an interpreter and translator for American forces. He served as the interpreter for Secretary of Defense Bob Gates when he would come to Afghanistan. And he was able to come to the United States in 2013 under our special immigrant visa program that we established several years ago. And so those wartime allies is why veterans feel so passionately about this. I'm gonna skip the video and go straight into the conversation, but there's a veteran who's moderating today that would not claim that she's a veteran, but I would submit that she is. Jasmine Ogama has just written beautifully and prolifically on this topic. Her family's from Egypt, and I'm going to encourage her to tell the story of being in a Humvee in March of 2003 when she was with the 82nd Airborne Division. But we're so enthused to have the panel that's here. I'm going to turn it over to you, Jasmine. Thank you very much. I'll let you introduce the panelists, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much to Tom and Scott and Joe and the entire team for putting this together. And Scott, thank you for your generous words. I would not call myself a veteran, but I was a translator for U.S. forces in Iraq in 2003 for several weeks during the initial invasion, and then again in the Middle East in various capacities. And so I've had the opportunity to work with our troops and have huge respect, obviously, for their service. So the conversation that we're having today, like Scott said, is a conversation. This is not a lecture. We're not going to sit here and talk at you, obviously. It's a chance to get to hear from our panelists and then to hear from you in the audience and hopefully have a back and forth about what American values and ideals are, what they mean to us and what they mean to veterans who served, and both the veterans and the civilians and people who support them back here at home. And of course the refugees as well, who have come to this country in search of a better life. And, you know, I think this has always been an important issue, the issue of refugees and the debate over what sort of responsibility we as Americans hold towards people who are fleeing their countries, but never more so than now. There was a report that was just released today by the UN Refugee Agency. I encourage you all to take a look at it. It's available online, and it's called Global Trends. And it's pretty grim. You know, I'm not gonna lie. It's a pretty grim report, and it has a bunch of numbers and figures and facts about the state of refugees today. And I just want to share a couple of statistics with you just to wrap our heads around how big this crisis is and what kind of a moral responsibility we have towards people who are trying to flee war and persecution. So the report notes that an average today, in 2015 actually, an average of 24 people per minute have been forced to flee their homes due to war or persecution. That's 4 times more than a decade ago. That's how bad the problem is getting. At the end of 2015, 65.3 million people were displaced from their homes. And to put that in perspective a little bit, just 1 year ago, it was 59.5 million. So that's almost 5 million people in 12 months who have been displaced from their homes. So, measured against the world's population of 7.4 billion people, 1 in every 113 people globally, 1 in 113 people is either an asylum seeker, an internally displaced person, or a refugee. That's the state of the world that we live in right now. And according to data that UNHCR was able to gather, they can't always gather the best data, but this is what they have. They found that in 2015, 51% of the world's refugees were children. So, so what do we do about it? How do we feel about it as veterans, as refugees, as citizens? What kind of responsibility do we have towards this problem, and how do we measure that responsibility to protect and that responsibility to help with our responsibility to keep our country safe and to maintain whatever national identity we feel that we have that's important to us as a country? I obviously don't know the answer to that question, and I don't think anybody does. Otherwise, this wouldn't be, I wouldn't be reading these statistics right now. But that's some of what we're hoping to hear from our panelists today and from the audience. And, I'll just say a couple of things, both in terms of my recent experience and why I was so happy that you asked me to be here today. I just came back from Scott I don't know if you mentioned this, but I'm a civil servant. I'm now a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, working on issues of countering violent extremism. But I also took a few months off earlier this year to go to documentary filmmaking school to learn how to tell stories, learn from the professionals, because I think storytelling and narratives are just an incredibly important part of everything that we do. And so I did that, and so I recently returned from Greece, where I was part of a crew filming a documentary on the Syrian refugee crisis there. And, I have to tell you, and you guys will know on the panel here, and maybe some in the audience too, it is one thing to read statistics in a report and quite another thing to be in a refugee camp, listening to people telling you their stories and watching babies crawling in the dirt, and children who haven't had an education in months, and men who can't provide for their families and just can't even face their families because there's nothing that they could do for them, and to realize what it actually means to be a refugee. And the people that I talked to in Greece had been, languishing in this camp, makeshift camp, for about 4 or 5 months. They arrived before the borders in Greek Macedonia borders were closed, and once they arrived, the borders were closed, and so now they're just stuck in this camp. And they don't know where they're going, they don't know what's going to happen to them, and so I can't even imagine the frustration of waking up every day literally not knowing what your fate is going to be at the end of the day. And that's when it really hit me what it means to be a refugee. And so it occurred to me that, simply closing our borders is not going to solve the problem. Europe has closed its borders. The U.S. Is taking some refugees, but not necessarily a significant amount when you think of the number of refugees that are out there. And it's a struggle between values and between interests and between our security and our humanity. So, I really look forward to hearing from you and hearing, how you feel about these lines that we have to maintain and our obligations and our feelings towards this problem. So with that, I will introduce the panelists. Lauren Augustine is a senior legislative associate for Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Prior to joining them, she served in the U.S. Army and deployed with the 1st Infantry Division to Taji, Iraq, providing surveillance and reconnaissance for central Iraq and Baghdad. And you also own and operate CrossFit Unbowed alongside her husband in Woodbridge, Virginia. So thanks for being here, Lauren, and thanks for your service. As Scott mentioned, Ajmal Fakiri was a translator for former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates and couldn't be here today, but I'm really glad we had the opportunity to hear about his story, and hopefully we can see him at a future event. I know I would love to meet him. I haven't met him yet. Myra Dagepal is a policy advisor for the U.S. campaign for Burma and was a refugee for 17 years before resettling in the United States. You now advocate for refugees from Burma, and you've testified before the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission of the U.S. House of Representatives. And Myra also serves as the chairwoman of the Karen American Organization. Joe Jenkins is a graduate fellow, as you mentioned, at the LBJ School of Public Affairs, Washington, D.C. Center. You're also a Marine veteran who served with Marine Aircraft Group 29 during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Thanks for your service, and thanks for all of you for being here. And with that, I will turn it over to Lauren.
Hello, thank you so much for that lovely introduction and all of your work on this issue. In my eyes, you are by far a veteran, as Scott said, and that speaks to our larger issue here today, is that in order for us to continue being a successful fighting force, we have to recognize, support, and appreciate the people that aid and serve our troops overseas, of which you are certainly one of them. I've been asked to sort of introduce myself and give a little bit about my story. So I served in the Army. As was mentioned, I flew UAVs, better known as drones, with the 1st Infantry Division, Big Red 1, in Camp Taji, Iraq, at the very end of our initial operations in Iraq in 2010 and 11. I joined the military after going to Virginia Tech, so my mom likes to give me a hard time that I went to college to enlist in the Army, and she's absolutely correct. My reasoning for wanting to go in the military is really threefold, and none of them can really be left out when I talk about why I went to the military. For starters, when I come from a military background, family background, there's been somebody in my family in every war since World War I. And when I was very young, I remember my grandfather saying, he was a Vietnam veteran, I'm sad to see that service ends with me, because I have a few male cousins who by no means would ever go into the military short of a draft. And I remember thinking and saying to him, well, why can't I? There's no reason why, just because Seth isn't going in, I can't go in. So from a young age, I had him teaching me how to walk and parade rest and march and give orders, and went into Virginia Tech, which is a senior military academy, wanting to serve. And then even prior to that, I lived in this area around September 11th. I'm a fourth generation Northern Virginian, so a rare native to this area. And a few days after September 11th, my dad took me to see the Pentagon, and it had a very lasting impression on me. And in that moment, I was 14 years old, I said, I'm going to do something to serve this country because of the sacrifices that people made today should not go unanswered. Fast forward to college, I saw the core cadets at Virginia Tech. And thought, maybe I'll serve in a different capacity because waking up at 6 a.m. seems pretty miserable to do PT. But then the recession hit, and my dreams of working for NATO or working at the State Department really didn't seem plausible. And so I enlisted in the Army. Had a fantastic opportunity with the Army to fly UAVs and serve this country, and loved every minute of my service. Got out of the Army and recognized that there is a significant need for somebody to stand up for our veterans and our allies. Back here in DC, came back home and was given a great opportunity with IAVA to fulfill that role. I've been there about 2.5 years now, and I focus mainly on the larger veteran space, so looking at healthcare, mental health care. Right now, I'm in the throes of a campaign to advocate for women veterans. And I was, in preparing for this, saw some overlap in some of the conversations of it's really a marginalized group of veterans who's often forgotten in the larger scheme of things. So that's what I focus on at IAVA, and I'm honored to be here today and look forward to our conversation.
Thank you. This might sound like a joke, but also the reality. I call myself the product of human rights first. And there's a story behind it, but before then, I'll go back to my origin story quickly. So I was born in Burma, literally in jungle, eastern Burma, bordering with Thailand. And the one thing I'd like to tell the people that I talk to is that we have two Burmas. And the central Burma is the Burma where majority of us know about it, where Rangoon, Naypyidaw, all kinds of grand stuff is going on Aung San Suu Kyi and LD and all this stuff. But where I came from, perhaps you don't even know where is the current state, and I would blame you because not that many people know about it. But that's where the persecution has been going on ever since. And depending on which ethnic group you ask, it's more or less at least 40 to 60 plus years. So that's where I came from. And half of my immediate family members were killed, murdered, tortured, raped by the Burmese military. But thankfully I'm still alive today, so it's a great opportunity for me to be presenting the story of not just myself, but also the people who are still struggling, surviving such persecution right now in the midst of everyone is thinking Burma is great. But apparently it's not. Fighting is still going on a daily basis in northern Burma, Shan State, and Kachin State. Western Burma is also, we heard about the Rohingya refugees, IDPs. Nobody cares so much about it. And a lot of people think that, okay, things will be great for them because now we have a new government. But the problem is how much that new government can do is one question, but also how much interest they have in order to make any changes for these Rohingya and Muslim minorities in our country. So those are the big questions. But anyway, so how did I get to the US? So after I finished my high school in the refugee camp, like she mentioned earlier, there was, you don't really know what is your future hold. Literally living in the compound that is surrounded by the fence. And as soon as we were outside of the fence, we get arrested by the Thai police. And then either we were sent back to Burma or put into jail or, it's going to end up at not a fun place, basically. So after my high school, I keep finding a way, how do I get higher education? And so literally, I went illegally into Thailand, and I started working for a small NGO that helps the Burmese refugees, youth refugees, to sort of like get higher education to a certain extent, like GED. And so I worked there. I myself was illegal, worked with illegal students. And so basically, we broke the laws. But hey, where is the other option? We don't have any other option. So, but I worked there for 4 or 5 years, and I also learned that I've been followed by the Thai and Burmese spies. I don't really know until now. I could figure out why they would follow me. I mean, I'm just an ordinary person. I didn't do anything against whatever they want. But so they followed me to the point where I wasn't able to come home, and I had to be outside of my house until midnight, and then I come home, because if I were coming back before then, the police were like in front of my house and I'll get arrested. So I approached some of the friends, and they advised that maybe you should go away for some years. And thankfully, I have a very good friend in Hawaii. So I landed in Hawaii in late 2003. And you would think that Hawaii is a paradise, but it's not really paradise for me, because I didn't find enough problem as well as not enough solution, because I like to do advocacy and talk about my people and the suffering we are going through. And so eventually I decided to come to New York, where I have enough life to be busy, to keep myself busy. And I ended up doing advocacy at the Burma Fund UN office on behalf of the people of Burma to the UN missions. And I loved it. But also, how did I get my asylum? So I got into the country for about 8 months, and then I realized I will be able to go back, but at the same time, I have no other choice to apply for asylum. Do I have that chance? I'm not really quite sure. So I put in my application, preparing and put in my application, and then the time came and I got my interview. It didn't take me long. 5 minutes, I was rejected. And then the officer told me, well, you have about 3 months to find a lawyer or to appeal. At the same time, you can get arrested anytime and get deported. Well, that was pretty intense. But then I went to school, and I have a friend from Cameroon who was so kind, and she was like, why don't you reach out to Human Rights First? They helped me to get my asylum in 6 months. Hold on, I didn't wait a night. I came home, I searched on Human Rights First, called them the next morning, they called me back, they asked me to come in to bring in my brief file. I did everything they want me to do. Well, within 2 weeks, they were like, okay, we accept your case, we'll move on and do your work with your case. So in short, they found me the pro bono lawyer, and finally, not short enough or not long enough, it took me 5 years to get my asylum. But anyway, without the help from Human Rights First, I don't know where I'm going to be at this point, or am I going to be still alive? I'm not really quite sure. And that is why I feel somewhat so responsible to the point where I have to give back. So start from 2007, we have a lot of refugees start pouring in from Burma. Sometimes, some of the days, it's like a whole plane full of Burmese refugees. So the refugee agency started reaching out to me about translators, interpreters, to give country orientation and all those stuff. And I have no problem. I love doing those. So I sort of like put on a lot in my plate, but I got to the point where I was like, oh, no, I have no more energy. So then it gave me the opportunity to reach out to the community and teach them how to do what I do. So that's how I paid forward. But at the same time, I find it so amazing that everyone who comes here, they have only 3 months to get support. And after 3 months, they have to be on their own. It's very challenging. But at the same time, they're trying as hard as they can to be the productive citizens, to be the contributors of this great country that offer a safe place. So that's why I'm not really sure what is your background, what are you doing after this, what are you going to talk about refugees, but the one thing I feel as if I have to tell everybody is that we the refugees are not the troublemakers. And I wish some of the lawmakers are here. We're not the troublemakers, but I'm certainly sure that there are some bad apples, but please don't put us into the same basket. We have a lot of refugees who are working so hard, preparing our meals. Do you know that? Preparing the clothing or the shoes, the fans, we are using it. Do we know that? They work so hard. They don't read ABCD. But then they have to stand up all day. And they get paid only $8 an hour. But they are willing to give back. So I don't really see the harm of accepting refugees just because some people become terrorists or committing terrorist acts. And then we have to penalize every refugee that will be coming into this country on their behalf. So the bottom line, we are the productive citizens. We are giving back as much as we receive. We're trying to give back as much as we can. And therefore, we want it to be, the people who will be coming, we also want them to have the opportunity to have a safe place. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jasmine, for your introduction. Before I make any remarks that will be brief, I just wanted to say that this is World Refugee Day, and I want to be here first and foremost to honor the stories of refugees like Myra, and just give her a quick round of applause for her story and sharing her story. Of people like Ajmal who couldn't be here with us. So, just a bit about myself. I did serve in the U.S. Marine Corps in Operation Iraqi Freedom. I did 2 tours over there in the Al Anbar province. So this is where Fallujah is located, I'm sure you have heard. And this sort of rings true at this moment because right now, Fallujahs are being displaced from their own city as it's being retaken from ISIS. So we are seeing these events occur over and over. This problem is not a short-term problem, and it's not a temporary problem, and it's an important problem. And I wanted to sort of tell you a little bit how I got involved in that problem. And it sort of starts maybe for the reasons I joined the Marine Corps. So I joined the Marine Corps when I was 19, very young. I also got married at 19, very young. One of those was a good gift. And I joined, and this was after 9/11. 9/11 happened in 2001 when I was a junior in high school. So a little bit removed from that. So I can't say that that's the main reason I joined, but it's part of it. But I'll tell you probably the main reason I joined the United States Marine Corps is because I was a poor kid from Dallas. And at that, I'm very idealistic, still am. And the idea that America stands for freedom in a place where someone, even a poor kid from Dallas, can get up and make something of themselves, rang true to me. It still does. It still very much appeals to me. And I think that's a commonality that a lot of people share, not just Americans. So I'd also like to talk just a little bit about 2 things. There are 2 implications here. There's and you talked a little bit about it, Jasmine, a national security part of this, and sort of a moral imperative. And I think Ajmal's story speaks directly to that national security imperative. Again, Ajmal is an interpreter that helped us out in Afghanistan. And the Special Immigrant Visa Program was designed specifically to bring over our allies to get them out of harm's way. But I'm sure that no one is up to date on this, but it was tried to be reauthorized as an amendment to the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, and unfortunately it could not get through. The future of this program is uncertain. We have over 4,000 of these people, like Ajmal, still in Afghanistan. To me, I think we can do better than that. I really do. I do not think we can turn our back on our allies like that. And especially concerning American interests in the future, how will we hold allies in the future? So that's the national security part of this. But that's sort of secondary to how I feel inside. And that second is that moral imperative. Like I said, I was very idealistic when I joined the Marine Corps, and I still am. And sort of still when I think of America, I think of, what's the image that I see? And that's the Statue of Liberty, right? And we all know the words that are inscribed there. It's right there. It doesn't say build a wall. It says open the golden gates. And I can just point to many instances of people coming over, our ancestors, and still arriving today, that have enriched us. And I think America is successful, not in spite of our refugees, but because of them. I think Myrna's a great example. And that's all I'll say, and I'm very happy to be here and to take part in this discussion. So, thank you.
I think you guys deserve a huge round of applause, so thank you so much for your comments. That was really great. I don't want to spend too much time talking. I would love to turn it over to the audience and get some questions and conversations going. The one thing that I did want to note, I think that just stands out to me listening to your experiences, is how each of you formed these opinions through personal experience. You know, you either through military service or because of your experience in Burma, you actually understood what it means to be in need and what it means to be able to help somebody else in need. And I think one of the most difficult challenges in getting people to rally to action is that it is hard for some people to go from the theoretical to the practical, or from the theoretical to the personal. So I wonder if maybe you could just briefly, each of you tell us a little bit about, given your experiences and how you were able to translate empathy into actual action, how we can do more of that and how we can get more Americans to understand what's at stake, given that not every one of us can go out and see these things in person. How do you make it resonate?
That's a good question. I'm sort of fortunate to work in the veterans space in that it's very bipartisan. There's a lot of support for it. But even still, Iraq and Afghanistan veterans make up 1% of the population. And so when we're looking at sort of finite issues that impact just our generation of veterans, people don't necessarily want to listen. And I think that's the same here. Refugees make up a very small portion of the population, a very important part of the population. Just like veterans, they give back to the community. They make up our fabric of diversity, inclusivity, and that's a vital aspect of the American dream and the American ideals that we hold. But it's a quiet voice by nature of size. And so I think one of the things that is important for us to do as people in this room and as community builders and coalition builders is to come together and say, my voice by itself is not enough, but if I stand together with these two, now we're twice as loud. And if we come together as an entire community and as leaders and work together to build a coalition of support to say enough is enough with the fear-mongering and the hatred rhetoric, we're not going to stand for it. Our voice is louder than yours now. I think that's when we make the difference. When we make a minority come together to become a majority, we can see a better impact. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it as well, because mine's coming at it strictly from a veteran principal perspective, and I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say.
I think it is also, it is very important for us.
There's water.
Fancy chairs.
Yeah.
I'll
do you wanna
I'll do it. I'll be brief while you're taking a drink. But I think the best way that I can think of to create these connections is that, and I'll just give you a little story. In Al Anbar, again, a 19-year-old corporal of the guard, and in a road between Hit and Al Anbar. And Al Assad is the base that's right next to us, and that's where they train what we train the Iraqi army there. And they'd come back and forth and stop and chat with us. We trade cigarettes for water and just sort of shoot the breeze. I had never met anyone from Iraq before in my entire life, from Dallas, Texas. Never. After doing so, however, I felt like I had met someone from down the street. I really did. And I say this to say that it is almost impossible to hate someone that you get to know as a human being. So I would say we continue to tell the stories of refugees and highlight them and what they're doing and project that voice to all Americans so they can see exactly what these people are, who these people are, and that these people are Americans. And I think that's one of the best ways that I can think of.
Well, I certainly agree. And we also have a lot of refugee communities around. If there is any way we can communicate with them directly and get to know them and get to know how they live their lives, there will be a lot of positive stuff coming out from that encounter. Because, a lot of times when you sit around like this and you don't really have an idea what's going on in their community, a lot of people are afraid of, oh, those people are coming and taking away our job. Oh, those people are coming and eating our tax money on social welfare. That's not entirely true, I'm just telling you. With my personal experience with the communities, no. They're working as hard as they can. The bottom line, if they cannot make the end meets, then of course they work partially and also get food stamp, or if somebody who's really not able to do, then go for SSI, the supplementary income. So I think it's very important to connect with them in personal level as well, or maybe get out there, do their story in order to, so that we can broadcast this or spread it. They have a lot of success. They have a lot of good stuff that they can share with us. It's just that we don't have enough time to get out to them, I guess, as of now. So if we can do that in the near future, it'll only bring in positive outcome.
Thank you so much. I think we should turn it over to the audience for questions. If you could state your name and just very briefly what you do, just so that we can get to know you before we start talking, that would be great.
I'm Kate Adams. I'm a DC grad student here in the center along with Joe. And back in college, I did some very minimal volunteer work with a refugee group up in Utica, New York, which is actually a really popular area for refugee resettlement. And so the people that I worked with who were much more involved in this, had done a lot more work on this, they said that a lot of the problem was that there was a lack of resources and attention dedicated to refugee resettlement, so that refugees would sort of get here, be dropped off, and then that was sort of it. They weren't equipped to learn the language, they weren't sort of equipped with housing or things that they would need past that point. So I was just wondering, and maybe Myra could speak to this best perhaps, what is the step, what more can we do after that initial step of just letting people in as already happened?
I think the first step is the refugee agencies also has to be a little more proactive. I certainly understand the money they're getting from PRM is not enough to run their program for a long extent, and therefore they have to be able to work with churches, with community, with schools. And those areas, those places will come in and pick up whatever they're left off after 3 months or 6 months. Because even right now, even some of them, they don't have connection, but the churches are becoming a very good instrumental for the refugees, as well as other centers, especially also schools that pick up on the education side. So I think if we can encourage whoever who bring in the refugees to reach out to community itself. Giving example, like in St. Paul, Minnesota, we have about 8,000 Burmese refugees. And they have their own center, and that's where the refugees ended up coming into the Korean Refugee Center after their 3 months is done with the refugee agencies. And that becomes such a huge help, because there you find language ability where they can communicate with in their own language. And they're teaching them proper cultural orientation in terms of rules and norms. How you cannot leave your home alone, your children, minor children at home alone. These are very simple for us. We take granted for it, but they don't know this kind of stuff. Or you cannot chew bitter nuts and then spit it on the pole, which happened in Indiana, Fort Wayne. So those kind of problems seem to be teeny little, but at the same time it's a huge problem. So if we can work with the community. And one thing I can certainly tell you all is that pretty much every refugee from every country, they have their own little community to look out for each other. That's a very good step. That's a very good foundation. It's only the matter of we reach out to them, we work with them.
May I ask you another question? You mentioned before, really quick, I'm Rachel Buchan. I'm an intern at Human Rights First in the Anti-Trafficking Department. And where this question is coming from is that I'm an English teacher in Turkey during the academic year.
So I have quite a few Syrian refugee students, which has really opened my eyes to the issue and kind of, like you guys were saying, made it personal to me. And so coming from there, you mentioned storytelling. And Joe, you mentioned that moment of contact that kind of transforms an issue into being people. And something that I've struggled with is how to tell a story in a life-giving and dignity-maintaining way instead of just, because these aren't, for the most part, I probably wouldn't say that being a refugee is your primary identity. You're first a person, you're first, a nationality or whatever your identity is that's most central to you. And so even as I've sought to raise awareness with my family or my community as I'm back in the States, I've struggled with how to tell a story and how to tell these stories of my students in a life-giving way, in a productive way. And so I wondered if you just had insight on that or any experience to speak into it.
Well, to me, you just have to tell the real story. Because if you don't tell the real story, then people don't really understand what exactly is going on. So, like I told you, my story, that's the real thing. I can't flip it, I can't make it nicer or worse or anything. But the bottom line, the refugees, I don't consider myself as victims, but a survivor. I survived the situation, I fought for it, and I survived, and here I am. And I think that is already, it's full of dignity. There's nothing to be ashamed of.
Yes, I think she's exactly right. I think how to tell their stories in dignified ways to make that connection is you tell the truth in that they do not need to be looked at as victims at all, because what they're actually doing is so dignified. There are stories of refugees coming over and immediately helping, serving soup kitchens, helping the poor, and immediately giving back. I think focusing on those, on their service, on their compassion, their own compassion, the fact that they are doing so well at maintaining their family connections in the transition process is very humanizing, and it's very dignified. And they are not victims, they are survivors. I think it's an excellent point.
Do you want to add anything there?
Sure, I was going to say when we were looking over the prep questions for this, one of the things that we've been sort of prepped to talk about was, from the veteran perspective, veterans are usually painted as either having PTSD or being a superhero. And really, those are true for some people, sure, but the vast majority of people fall right in the middle, where they're normal people who have normal stories that serve their country and want to come home and continue serving. And I think it resonates with the refugee story as well. So we've got bad actors, sure. We also have people who are survivors and have triumphant stories of defiance and survival that we have to tell because that story is important. But the vast majority are people who have a family, who want a normal life, who want to come here, who want to get out of their situation, give back, continue serving, just normalize their life. And I think the only way we can do that is to tell the truth, is to tell their story, to stop making it one extreme or the other, and to give the bottom line up front. This is the reality, this is the truth. We're not going to paint a rosy picture about it, and we're also not going to blow it out of proportion. I think that's the only way we break through the barrier of extreme.
I think, one thing Scott had mentioned earlier, that he wanted me to tell the story of me in a Humvee, and I won't get into the story of me in the Humvee, but I will say that being in Iraq as a translator with U.S. troops, but speaking Arabic and being, kind of feeling like I had a foot in both worlds almost, it was such an illuminating experience, and it goes to what you guys are saying about the need to tell stories because we're all human beings and we have the same stories. So I think, a couple of quick things to your question about how to tell stories. One thing you learn, if you're learning how to make films or write a book or tell a story, is you have to have an empathetic character. You have to have a character that people can see themselves in that character, and that way they can move past the labels and the barriers that we have as human beings. We have biases, right? We have these labels that we associate with certain looks or certain uniforms or certain ways of speaking, and in Iraq you saw that because I was with U.S. troops, and we were wearing U.S. military uniforms, and then the Iraqis are wearing local dress, and just by virtue of the difference in uniforms, you automatically have this barrier between the two of you. Joe could be wearing, you're wearing a suit and tie right now. You could be wearing, a dishdasha with a hat, and you have your beard, so you could like totally fit in with the local Iraqi context. But then also you could be wearing a police uniform. Like the audience would necessarily have different first impressions of you because of each of those different uniforms without you even saying a word. So how do you get past that, and how do you break down those barriers and find a way to empathize or make the audience empathize with you? And I think what you all said about just telling the story honestly and telling your story and telling it with dignity and without making excuses is really an incredibly important thing to keep in mind when we're trying to tell these stories. Yes.
I'm Rebecca Wilson. I'm a second-year law student and a legal fellow at Save the Children. And since there's such a large percentage of children as refugees, I was wondering if you've noticed or have any ideas of any programs to, in particular, to reach children in this country, refugee children.
Say primary school, middle schools, those are the places where you can find a job.
Do you mean ways to help
Like assimilate
children
them.
in
Yeah,
schools
just
or
to help
assimilate them?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I don't know of any particular programs other than going to local schools and trying to find out where they are.
Yeah, I haven't looked at that side.
Well, but you've worked with Karen youth. You've worked at addressing some of their assimilation issues, preventing gang recruitment.
Yeah, I do those stuff with the government. Sorry, I don't know what's going on today. Maybe not from the flight last night. So I do work with some youth, the places where I can get to, but also the community themselves also trying to work in with the youth on their own. I come in sometimes just to give them different kinds of training, or sometimes just motivation stories, those kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, you're right. The youth are going through a lot of problems, especially the ones saying the age between 10 and 18 or 20, because of the education system we have back home is not the age limit at home. You can be 20 years old and you can be in grade 4. But here, once they get here, when they get to a certain age, they have to be in a certain class. So especially boys, when they cannot figure out how to jump from one place to another place because the gap is too big and they cannot comprehend, and they end up following the bad stuff. They do drugs, they end up becoming gangsters and all this stuff. So that's where I try to go into some communities where I can make my way and then talk to them about, this is not your dead end. You still have future if you wanted to make change. So sometimes bring them to different places, or sometimes introduce them to certain people where they can look up to, or they can get some kind of resources. So I guess, I mean, that is my own little thing that I can do at this time.
One of the I think the very difficult things that I found that children are facing, refugees, and I don't know if you've come across this, but I was interviewing a few Syrian refugees in New Jersey who had been in Jersey for 6 months. They were working with I think it was the IRC, the International Rescue Committee. That was their first point of contact when they came to the U.S. But they only work with these families for a couple of months, and then they turn them over to federal care, and then they go on welfare and so forth. And one of the services that the kids were being provided along with their parents were free English language classes, because a lot of them don't speak English when they come here. But the problem was that it's much easier for kids to learn a new language than it is for parents. And some of these, the parents were giving up on English classes because it was so difficult for them to learn English, and the instructors were American. Like the instructors didn't speak any Arabic, so these families would go into English class and they would just not understand a single word, and it was very hard to make the jump into. And so if the families are giving up on English language classes, then how are they supposed to mentor or assist the kids in learning English? And so I think maybe starting with organizations like IRC and UNHCR and trying to get contacts for those kind of community centers, and if anyone else knows of anything.
IRC is part of Refugee Council USA. It's a coalition of 20 organizations that work with refugees, all 9 resettlement agencies.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a youth caucus. And so if you can talk to me afterwards. Human Rights First is part of this. And so I attended the last national meeting of the Youth Refugee Caucus. They came here, representatives from all over the country. And so they have sort of youth trying to help youth in situations. So we can talk after that.
That's great, thank you.
I'm Micah Varga. I currently work for No One Left Behind, so we work with interpreters like him. But previously, before I came to No One Left Behind, I worked in direct services, refugee resettlement in Denver, Colorado. Denver's model, I think now having been exposed through No One Left Behind to resettlement in several different cities, Denver's model is rather good when it comes to serving refugee communities. They have a few things like those, they have a refugee youth consortium that meets between various resettlement agencies and churches and independent nonprofits that serve refugees to try and focus on the challenges that specific population faces. But they also have a lot of other community organizations that help out. They have a street fraternity that focuses solely on boys under the age of, I think, 16, and they really try to target boys who may be trying to go into gangs and give them a safe place to go and just spend their evenings. And we're also seeing across the country various schools that have been set up specifically to serve refugees. UMFO's school in Clarkston, Atlanta is probably the most well-known. She has an incredible book called Outcasts United, I believe. But Denver also has one of those schools that's really targeted to helping refugee kids because their educational goals really are different than an American kid. And putting them into an ESL program, which a lot of the ESL programs in the U.S. are targeted towards Spanish speakers. It may not help a Korean-speaking or an Arabic-speaking refugee.
So it sounds like you should definitely talk to these two guys afterwards. Yes.
Hi, I'm Sally Hill Cooper, and I've been retired for a long, long time. My background is transportation engineering. I know nothing, but I do have some connection through being acquainted with the American Friends Service Committee, so I'll hear a bit about this. But my question for all of you is, with the issues you're so passionate about and the stories you have that are so important, and the media that we have today, how do you feel that your information and these issues can get out more continuously, more broadly than they are right now, to spread the word?
Well, one way that I think we're trying to do is leverage veteran voices. So this is what Veterans for American Ideals is all about. And when you think about veterans organizations, you think of organizations that exclusively operate in the realm of the interest of veterans, but really we don't see veterans coalescing and speaking out on human rights issues or issues that involve such contentious topics. And I think we can do better at that. Because I think, especially with refugees, veterans have a particular expertise with it. And like I said, when you have those connections, as many veterans do to people that are affected by conflict, those are voices that we can put out there. And we put them side by side with the refugees that are here. These stories are powerful in conjunction. So I think that's a good way to do it.
I would obviously agree.
With the both conventions coming up, it'd be interesting if you could get a refugee who's able to speak at either or both of the conventions and put a face on it at a time when the country's paying attention. That's an idea.
I think I saw someone's hand in the back. You?
Yeah, I did. I just had a quick question. I don't want to drive this towards candidates or anything, but when so much of the discussion around refugees is driving against blocking certain types of refugees from being relocated here, from finding asylum here, what is response, and from you as well, but especially from veterans, how do you push back against that rhetoric? And I mean, after all, this is framed as a conversation about freedom. It would seem that type of rhetoric is against a notion of freedom, especially what we're talking about here.
Absolutely, I'll take that. I think the way you do that is first just having that veteran voice out there is moderating to the conversation. A lot of people and a lot of candidates, when they speak out, they like to use veterans, and I don't think that's right. I think veterans need to use them. And I think you will see that as a norm in the future, especially when we're coalescing towards issues that really fall on our ideals and our values. And I don't think these are political ideas. I don't think the idea that this country, which was a nation of immigrants, came and became what it is, not by shutting its doors, but by opening its doors. I don't think that is a contentious issue at all. And I think we start with with the Afghan allies that helped us out and open the door for that, normalize that process, see what it can do. And I think that's the linchpin on which we can have conversations further about how veterans can sort of, put their ideas out there to candidates saying, hey, don't speak for me. I served with this, I served with that, I saw this and I saw that. These are my experiences. And as much as you would like to say to the contrary, it is not the reality. And I think that's a powerful message.
And I'll just add, I always go back to when I'm thinking about the importance of the veteran voice on any topic, and particularly this one, because I think it is a natural progression for veterans to defend the American ideal, of which supporting refugees is an integral part of. I go back to a quote that's been attributed to Washington, but is questionably attributed to him, that deals with the idea that the willingness for anybody to serve this country in the future and in a capacity is entirely dependent on how they perceive the treatment of those that came before them. And I think that's applied across the board to both refugees and veterans, which is why I think it's a great combination of the two groups there. Because if we speak to the world and say, this is how we as Americans are treating refugees, this is how we as Americans are treating outsiders, how long do we have as a country that we can stand on that before it turns on us and people are no longer willing to fight for this country, no longer willing to stand up for this country, when we are not at our base supporting our most valuable principles. So I think you're dead on that the veteran voice is an important one, particularly in any election cycle. And I think it's important that we hear from candidates on these topics. I work for a nonpartisan organization, so we don't get into the candidates specifically. But I think across the board, it would be great if they could understand the veteran voice and the refugee voice and how those two are go together and why we need to hear more substance from them on it and not so much extremism.
Hi, I'm Dalal Hulu, and I'm a legal fellow at the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. So my question is, I have a Syrian client right now through a separate organization, and one of her fears was racism. So my question is to you guys, as veterans, we're talking about this need for you guys to protect human rights. What's actually being done? What efforts are you guys promoting?
Sure, so I can speak from Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. We specifically have delved into the SIV program more than anything, and that's a separate section in our policy agenda, which is under Preserve Our Legacy. And I think that speaks to how much we value it, that we consider it part of our legacy to protect and defend Iraq and Afghanistan refugees. We don't delve into the larger refugee issue, which I'm interested to hear what you have to say on it, but for us, within that SIV program, as Joe alluded to earlier, it's been, unfortunately became a contentious issue during this year's NDA process, and so it has not been formally extended past October 1st of this year. And we obviously are fighting to see that reversed and include more Iraqi SIV opportunities, as well as extending some opportunities for extended family and HUD vouchers to address some of the housing issues when they get here. So we're really focused on the SIV program and some of the the side issues that come along with that, but our first and foremost problem right now is to get that program extended. Unfortunately, it wasn't. Senator McCain's a great ally on this issue, and we're working to support him to get that through before the end of this fiscal year to make sure that there's no lapse in that program. But curious to hear if there's anything extra on the larger issue, since we focused really in on that SIV problem.
Right, and on the larger issue, and we're specifically talking about racism against refugees from a certain area. And to a large extent, this racism is just born out of fear. And I think we put the message out there that we are not afraid. We're not a fearful people. We never have been. And veterans, first and foremost, are not afraid of these. This is not an issue where we need to sacrifice our values to feel comfortable, to remain to keep a sense of security that it's not endangered by the refugee issue. As a matter of fact, to the contrary, not accepting refugees makes us less secure. And there are numerous evidences for that. But just back to the racism issue, the Islamophobia issue, I think that, again, you populate the room with normalized opinions, with voices that say no, and stories that say this is who I am, this is me, real, authentic, genuine stories, and we push those out there, and we have veterans backing that, and that is a hard thing to fight against. Real stories, real people, with the backing of veterans that are not afraid to stand with them, and I think that's a great way to normalize that voice and at least provide that entryway into that perception. People especially in Middle America, and all around America really, sort of have a special affection for veterans, of course. They sometimes even idolize veterans. Well, why isn't that being used, our inroads into their ways of thinking? Well, if this American Marine or this soldier, this pilot, is not afraid of doing this, well, maybe I need to rethink that position myself.
I think in our community, more and more these days, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get ourselves out there, put ourselves out there. For instance, if we have some kind of a special day for Quran, then they will hold sort of like a big event, present themselves in a positive way, inviting people from schools, from all the way in the mayor's office or the normal population, whoever they can reach out to come in and see them as other Americans, but not just refugees. And those actions also bring in quite a bit of positive feeling from the people who used to discriminate against us, because at the very beginning, when they hear about refugees, all they think about is these people are coming in, taking away our tax money. These people are beggars. And apparently when they see the reality, these people are not really beggars, then they realize we're quite wrong. And that's when people start changing their perception, and I think that's something that we can continue doing in our own part.
And I'll just add one more thing on the racism piece. I think that everyone in this room, has a potential to be an impactful change in directly addressing racism that we see. So it's within every person that hears it to actually say something and stand against it and to point out that it's unacceptable. I don't appreciate being told that. I don't appreciate hearing that. And here are some counter arguments that really prove why you're wrong. And I think it's going to take enough people being willing to stand up to individuals who are saying racist things before we'll see impactful change. And we're starting with, this whole room full of people that I would assume is willing to stand up and say that's not appropriate. As an American, as a veteran, I'm not going to stand by idly and let you speak that way in front of me. I think that's ground level grassroots advocacy that has to happen to see that sort of change.
That's very well said. Absolutely. I would like to give you all the opportunity to say, any sort of last remarks based on the conversation before we end. But before, I want to make sure everyone was able to get their questions in. So is there anyone else who would like to ask a question or has a comment or anything to say?
Well, as the director here.
Yes,
I
thank
have
you.
I've been in Washington for 25 years, and so I cannot believe I'm surprised by anything again, but what is the controversy about reauthorizing legislation? Are we talking about all refugees, or are we talking about actual allies that have interpreters and people like that we are not, that we're affirmatively, people are against this?
Sure. So I'll give you some of the NDAA. It's not so much controversy over the actual extension of SIB, and Mike, I'm sure you can speak more to this, but I will say for the NDAA process, it kind of turned into a classical, I want the toy, no, I want the toy, fine, nobody gets the toy. Because there were some senators who wanted, there was over 800 amendments the NDAA offered, and obviously not everyone is going to be considered. And so some senators held the fact that their amendment wasn't going to be debated or considered as essentially leverage to not consider other amendments, including the SIB extension. So it isn't necessarily a matter of an ill will for it, as it was just political infighting that I think we can overcome fairly easily. But Mike, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, so
And explain again what SIV is. This is
SIV
Washington
stands
Short.
for Special Immigrant Visa. So that's the particular visa that Afghan or Iraqi interpreters, people who worked for or on behalf of the U.S. government or military in Iraq or Afghanistan for, previously it was for 1 year, now it has to be for at least 2 years. They had to have provided faithful and honorable service. They qualify for this special immigrant visa. It's actually, has the strictest screening standards of any visa that is provided to any immigrants to the U.S. So Senator Lee's final
I was being
argument-
diplomatic.
Yes,
Some senator.
Yes, his final insistence was kind of the final thing that prevented the NDAA from going through. Basically, the situation that we're in is Congress currently treats visas like a non-renewable resource, rather like they do with money for particular programs right now, where they let it run out and then, oh, this, we have to shut down. They treat the visa program like that as well. So as it stands, we have a visa program that will continue for another year on the books, but the State Department has announced that if additional visas are not allocated, then the program will end by the end of the year. And Senator Lee was a huge barrier, but we also had a lot of opposition from the head of the Judiciary Committee, so basically Senators Grassley and Sessions. There were questions that were raised that were more along the lines of basically that they didn't want to increase immigration whatsoever, and so if more special immigrant visas were going to be added, then immigration had to be decreased in another area.
And there was also some concerns with that, some other concerns from them just on a procedural legislative level as well that really were not germane to the subject matter more than they were to the legislative process, just to add to that, as well.
And then it started getting into objections that really you could tell there was getting into fear. Questions about the fact that right now if they want to revoke someone's visa after arrival, they have to take them to court, and that person has the right to an attorney, and it's a process that they have to go through. They wanted to try to give the State Department the ability to revoke someone's visa without having to present any evidence, which obviously that's a non-starter. If someone wore an American uniform and walked in combat beside our troops, he should at least get an attorney if you're trying to deport him. So things of that nature that were rather frustrating. So,
but generally speaking, there is, I believe, enough support to get it through. There's never going to be 100%. I mean, there is sometimes, but on this issue, there's not going to be 100 senators that vote yes. We don't need 100 senators to vote yes, and I think we have enough to get there. It was simply a procedural Senate infighting that had nothing to do with the actual language of the legislation. But I think we can, with enough coalition, enough voices, can overcome it and get the program extended.
You're on the right bill.
and it's always been a bipartisan issue.
Yep.
That's the thing right now is people are getting caught up on, certain presidential candidates and various things that are occurring right now. But there's still a very wide range of bipartisan senators and representatives who support this, and so there's no reason for it not to.
No, I think we'll get there. Didn't go through in the easy way.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
I'd like to take just a minute to summarize just a couple of things that we heard from the panelists, especially in terms of action that we can take, but before that, is there anything, any final thoughts, anything that you wanted to say?
I'll just say let's keep having these discussions and these conversations and having our refugees tell their stories in this manner. I think that's super important. I'm just very glad to be here as part of that.
Yeah, and thank you so much Tom, for allowing this conversation to happen. Let me just run down this quick list that I have, and then I'd like to turn it over to you for the final word. So just some of the things that we heard from you today and from the audience, and maybe some things that we can think about in terms of taking action and making a difference on this issue is, one, speak up for American values. And, veterans, of course, you have an incredible platform as a refugee, as a veteran, you have the credibility. It's very, very hard for someone to discredit what you're saying because you've been there, you've been in the trenches, so to speak, also for you, Myra, and you have the credibility to do so. And we've never, if anyone who hears me speak will hear me saying this like every single time I speak, but we've never had such an ability to speak our minds. We don't need permission from anybody. We have our cell phones, we have Facebook, we have Twitter. You can just say whatever you want to say, and it will be heard by somebody. So we can do that. The second thing, Myra, you mentioned working with current communities, finding current communities that are working on these issues and trying to find a way to plug into that, and then maybe even taking it a step further and figuring out how to link different communities that are working on these issues and making the minority into a majority, that hopefully more voices can be heard that way. And to that end, I obviously encourage all of you to go up to the panelists afterwards and share the resources that you have so that we can make a bigger impact on this issue. The other thing is that as we're helping to tell stories of refugees, to do so highlighting the dignity and commonality and empathy that come with these stories. Get involved, call your representatives, make sure that, whether it's this SIV issue or any other issue that we're talking about. I always love this story in Charlie Wilson's War where Tom Hanks talks about busing people to the polls against this guy who ran over his dog. We have the ability this is, after all, a democracy, and we have the ability to impact these decisions, but we have to speak out in order to do so. So we'd encourage you to do that as well, and maybe you guys have ideas later for how to do that. Speak out against racism is an incredibly important one, especially in this election cycle. This is an issue that is becoming more and more problematic, especially against Muslims or anyone who is perceived to be a Muslim. So if you are sitting next to someone on Southwest Airlines who is about to be kicked off for speaking Arabic or doing math, speak up, say something about it. If you see anyone being harassed, it's our responsibility to say something when we see stuff like that happening, because it's not acceptable. And finally, if I can offer or ask them to stay connected with all of you, whether it's on Facebook or Twitter, if you are on any of those platforms with the LBJ Center and just so that, and with Human Rights First, then we can continue this conversation in other platforms. And Tom, I'll just turn it over.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for coming. You've made history. You are at the first public event of the LBJ Washington Center. And we talk about policy a lot, and our students often say they get depressed because things don't change. And I just want you to look at those four pictures on the wall: the Medicare Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, and the Immigration and Naturalization Act, all within 2 years. Tens of millions of people's lives changed by that. So what you're doing does matter, and things can change. I want to thank the panel. What a fantastic show. And we have cookies still and coffee, and please talk among yourselves. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.